Winter. A time for cozy fires, hot cocoa, families gathering close as snow falls softly outside. But beneath that picturesque Hallmark Channel scene, something else stirs, something ancient, something that thrives in the cold, in the dark. When the sun sets early and shadows grow long, it whispers on the wind, an icy breath that chills you to the bone. These are the stories of those who crossed paths with that darkness and lived to regret it. Here are 3 disturbing true winter horror stories that will make you think twice about venturing out into the snow. Picture this: a young family, the Millers, driving home on a snowy Christmas Eve. John, the father, grips the steering wheel, his knuckles white as the snowdrifts piling up on the side of the road. Beside him, Sarah, his wife, hums along to Christmas carols, trying to ignore the unsettling quiet of the radio. In the back, their 2 young children, Emily and Ethan, doze peacefully, oblivious to the growing danger outside. The snowstorm hits suddenly, a blinding whiteout that engulfs their car like a ravenous beast. The wind howls like a banshee, whipping the snow into a frenzy, and John can barely see 2 feet in front of him. Panic claws at the edges of his mind. He knows they need to find shelter, and fast. Through the swirling snow, John spots a faint light, a beacon of hope in the blinding storm. He steers the car towards it, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and desperate relief. As they draw closer, the outline of a large, rambling house emerges from the blizzard, its windows glowing with an eerie yellow light. John pulls up to the house and honks the horn, a desperate plea for help. A moment later, the front door creaks open, revealing a figure silhouetted against the warm light within. John throws the car into park and fights his way out, the wind a physical force trying to push him back. He shields his eyes from the snow and approaches the figure, his voice barely audible above the storm. "Excuse me, our car is stuck. Can you help us?" The figure steps back, beckoning them inside. It's an old woman, her face etched with wrinkles, her eyes strangely vacant. Inside, the house is eerily quiet, the air thick with the smell of dust and something else John can't quite place. It smells old. The old woman leads them down a dark hallway, her footsteps silent on the thick carpet. She ushers them into a dimly lit living room, a fire crackling in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls. John turns to thank their host, but the old woman is gone. He calls out, his voice echoing in the stillness, but there's no answer. Sarah joins him, her eyes wide with unease. "This is strange, John. I don't like it." He tries to reassure her, telling her it's just an old house, but even he feels a shiver crawl down his spine. They try to call for help, but the storm has knocked out the phone lines. Hours crawl by, each tick of the grandfather clock in the corner amplifying the unsettling silence. The children, sensing their parents' anxiety, grow restless and start to cry. Then, the nightmares begin. Emily wakes up screaming, her tiny body trembling, her eyes wide with terror. "The shadows," she whispers, clutching at her mother. "They're alive." Ethan soon follows, plagued by nightmarish visions of grotesque creatures lurking in the corners of the room. John tries to dismiss their fears as childish nightmares, but deep down, he can't shake the feeling that something is terribly wrong. The shadows in the room do seem to writhe and twist, taking on sinister shapes in the flickering firelight. He sees fleeting glimpses of movement out of the corner of his eye, hears whispers that seem to slither from the walls themselves. Days turn into a blurry, terrifying eternity. The storm rages outside, cutting them off from the world, while inside the house, an unseen evil tightens its grip. John becomes increasingly frantic, his attempts to contact the outside world met with a deafening silence. He searches the house for a way out, for any sign of their mysterious host, but finds nothing. It's like they're trapped in a waking nightmare, the house itself a malevolent entity holding them captive. One by one they start to lose hope. Then just as suddenly as it began, the storm breaks. Sunlight streams through the dusty windows, illuminating the living room with an almost blinding brightness. John rushes outside, his lungs gasping for fresh air, his heart pounding with a mixture of relief and lingering dread. He looks around, but there's no sign of any other houses, no sign of any roads. They're stranded in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by miles of untouched snow. Had the house moved? Had it lured them here? As quickly as it had appeared, the house vanishes, leaving the family standing in the snow, their breath forming icy clouds in the frigid air. John gathers his family close, his mind reeling, his heart heavy with a terror he can't explain. They're rescued days later, their story dismissed as a delusion brought on by the trauma of the storm. But John, Sarah, Emily, and Ethan know the truth. They know that winter doesn't just bring snow and ice. Sometimes it brings something far more sinister, something that waits in the shadows, something that preys on the lost and the vulnerable. Something that, even now, lurks in their nightmares, a chilling reminder of the snowstorm that almost claimed their souls. Imagine, a lone hiker, silhouetted against the stark beauty of a snow-covered mountain. His name is Mark, and he thrives on solitude, on the challenge of testing his limits against the unforgiving power of nature. But this time, nature has something far more sinister in store. Mark sets out on his trek with his usual quiet confidence, his backpack laden with supplies, his breath forming plumes of vapor in the frigid air. The sun glints off the pristine snow, blindingly white, the silence broken only by the crunch of his boots. He feels invigorated, alive, alone in his element. As the hours pass, the sun begins its descent, casting long, eerie shadows across the snow. The temperature plummets, the air growing heavy with an almost tangible sense of isolation. Mark presses on, determined to reach his intended campsite before nightfall. He glances back, a flicker of unease stirring within him. He could have sworn he saw a figure silhouetted against the blinding white, a dark shape that seemed to vanish as quickly as it appeared. He shakes his head, dismissing it as a trick of the light, the first tendrils of paranoia creeping in as the darkness deepens. Night falls, blanketing the mountain in an oppressive silence. Mark huddles in his tent, the thin nylon walls offering little comfort against the biting wind. He tries to ignore the sounds that filter through the fabric, the unsettling crunch of footsteps in the snow, the whisper of his name carried on the icy wind. Sleep, when it finally comes, is filled with unsettling dreams. Visions of a shadowy figure, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light, stalking him through the frozen wasteland. He wakes with a gasp, his heart pounding, his body slick with cold sweat. He tells himself it was just a dream, but the line between dream and reality begins to blur. The next morning, Mark discovers that some of his supplies are missing. His food bag has been ripped open, his water bottle drained. He tries to rationalize it, telling himself it must have been an animal, but deep down, he knows that something isn't right. Whatever took his supplies moved with a purpose, with an eerie intelligence that chills him to the bone. He continues his trek, but the sense of being watched, of being hunted, intensifies with every passing hour. He catches fleeting glimpses of movement in the periphery of his vision, hears the echo of footsteps that seem to vanish into thin air. He's never been one for superstition, but now fear claws at the edges of his mind, whispering that he's not alone. As the days wear on, Mark's paranoia turns to full-blown terror. He's no longer sure what's real and what's a figment of his increasingly fragile sanity. The mountains, once a source of solace, now feel like a vast, frozen prison closing in on him. He starts leaving offerings of food, desperate to appease whatever entity is stalking him. He even tries to reason with it, shouting into the wind, his voice swallowed by the vast emptiness. But the entity only grows bolder, its presence a suffocating weight on his chest. One night, huddled in his tent, his supplies dwindling, his hope fading with the dying embers of his fire, Mark hears it. A low growl, guttural and primal, just outside his tent. The nylon wall ripples as something heavy brushes against it. He scrambles back, his eyes wide with terror, his hand fumbling for his ice axe. He knows, with a certainty that chills him to the core, that this is it, that whatever has been stalking him has finally come to claim him. He lunges for the tent flap, ripping it open, ready to face his pursuer. But there's nothing there, only the endless expanse of snow, bathed in the cold light of the moon. He stumbles out, his breath catching in his throat, his eyes scanning the landscape, searching for any sign of movement. Then he sees it. a single set of footprints in the snow, leading away from his campsite and disappearing into the darkness of the surrounding trees. Footprints that are too large, too inhuman. Footprints that send a shiver down his spine, a primal fear that speaks of something ancient and evil. Mark doesn't wait to see what made those prints. He packs up his remaining supplies and flees, driven by a terror he's never known before. He hikes through the night, fueled by adrenaline and fear, not stopping until he stumbles out of the wilderness and into the relative safety of a small mountain town. He never returns to the mountains, haunted by the memory of his ordeal, forever changed by his encounter with the frozen stalker. He tries to explain what happened, but the words sound hollow, even to his own ears. He knows that no one will ever truly believe him, that they'll dismiss his story as a case of mountain madness, but Mark knows the truth. He knows that there are things in this world that defy explanation, things that lurk in the shadows at the edge of our understanding, things that prey on our fears, that feed on our isolation. And he knows that some winters, the only thing more terrifying than the cold is the company it keeps. Chapter 3. The Town's Winter Curse. Imagine a quaint New England town, nestled amidst snow-covered hills, its streets strung with twinkling lights, the air filled with the scent of pine and wood smoke. But beneath the idyllic facade, a darkness festers, a chilling secret buried deep within the town's history. The town of Hollow Creek has always been a place of harsh winters, but this year, the cold is different. It's a bone-deep chill that seeps into your very soul, a harbinger of something wicked stirring in the shadows. The townsfolk, hardened by generations of harsh winters, feel it too. A sense of unease hangs heavy in the air, a palpable dread that whispers on the wind. It begins subtly with strange occurrences that are easily dismissed as winter's bite. Ice forming on the inside of windows, patterns too intricate, too disturbing to be natural. Children's snowmen appearing defaced in the night, twisted into grotesque caricatures. Whispers on the wind, carrying fragments of forgotten rhymes, speaking of a vengeful spirit, a winter's curse. Then the disappearances begin. A local farmer, venturing out to tend to his livestock, vanishes without a trace, his footprints ending abruptly in the snow. A young woman walking home from her evening shift at the general store is swallowed by the shadows, her screams lost on the icy wind. Fear grips Hollow Creek, a suffocating blanket of paranoia that settles over the town like a shroud. The townsfolk, once a tight-knit community, now eye each other with suspicion, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and distrust. Old rivalries resurface, fueled by whispers of a curse, of a sacrifice that must be made to appease the ancient evil that haunts their town. The town's elders, keepers of Hollow Creek's dark history, gather in the dimly lit back room of the library, their faces etched with worry. They speak in hushed tones of a legend, passed down through generations, of a woman accused of witchcraft, burned at the stake on a night much like this, her dying breath a curse upon the town that condemned her. The legend claims that every 100 years when the winter is at its harshest, the witch's spirit returns, seeking vengeance for her unjust demise, and with each victim it claims, its power grows stronger, its grip on Hollow Creek tightening. Desperate, the townsfolk turn to the legend for answers, for a way to break the curse. Some cling to the old ways, performing ancient rituals, leaving offerings of food and trinkets at the edge of the woods, hoping to appease the vengeful spirit. Others, their faith shaken, turn on each other, accusing their neighbors of witchcraft, of being in league with the evil that haunts them. As the disappearances escalate, the town descends into chaos. The sheriff, a man hardened by years of law enforcement, finds himself outmatched, his rational mind struggling to comprehend the horrors that plague his town. He knows that there's a logical explanation for everything, but the evidence, the sheer terror in the eyes of his neighbors, whispers of something far more sinister. A group of teenagers, emboldened by bravado and a healthy dose of liquid courage, decide to take matters into their own hands. Armed with baseball bats and flashlights, they venture into the woods, determined to confront the witch's spirit, to end the curse that has gripped their town for far too long. They never return. Days turn into weeks, each day colder, each night longer, the town's hope dwindling with the fading daylight. The streets, once bustling with life, are now deserted, the only sounds the howling wind and the crunch of snow underfoot. Hollow Creek has become a ghost town, its inhabitants prisoners in their own homes, haunted by the chilling legend of the winter's curse. Then, just when all hope seems lost, a stranger arrives. A woman, her face hidden by a wide-brimmed hat, her eyes as cold and blue as the winter sky. She speaks of ancient magic, of a ritual that can appease the witch's spirit, but it comes at a price. A sacrifice must be made, a life for a life. The townsfolk, desperate and broken, gather in the town square, their faces pale in the moonlight. The stranger stands before them, her voice a low murmur that seems to weave its way into their very souls. She tells them that the witch's spirit seeks not vengeance but justice. It demands that the truth of its death be revealed, that the injustice of its condemnation be acknowledged. The town's elders, their faces etched with guilt and shame, finally confess. They reveal the truth of the witch's trial, of the false accusations, of the fear that drove them to condemn an innocent woman. They offer themselves as atonement, begging for forgiveness, for an end to the curse. The stranger nods, a flicker of sadness in her eyes. She performs the ritual, her voice rising and falling in an ancient language, her hands weaving intricate patterns in the air. The wind picks up, swirling around them, the temperature plummeting until their breath hangs frozen in the air. And then, as suddenly as it began, it's over. The wind dies down, the temperature rises, and the oppressive weight that has cloaked the town for weeks lifts. The stranger is gone, vanished without a trace. The townsfolk of Hollow Creek are left to pick up the pieces, to rebuild their lives, forever marked by the winter's curse. They erect a memorial in the town square, a testament to the innocent woman they condemned, a reminder of the darkness that lies dormant within their history. And every winter, when the wind howls and the snow falls, the townsfolk of Hollow Creek remember the witch's curse, a chilling reminder that some secrets are best left buried, and that some winters, the only thing more terrifying than the cold is the truth it brings to light. These are just a few of the countless stories whispered around campfires and flickering oil lamps. Tales that remind us that winter's beauty can sometimes hide its darkest secrets. As the snow falls and the wind howls, remember, not all dangers are visible. Some lurk just beyond the reach of the firelight, waiting for you to let your guard down, to venture too far into the cold. So stay safe, stay warm, and always be aware of what might be lurking in the shadows. Because sometimes, the most terrifying monsters are the ones we can't see, the ones that prey on our fears, that feed on our isolation.